The silk slid against my fingertips, a whisper of fabric that wasn't there. Or rather, should have been there. Laura stood at the edge of the bed, the soft glow of the bedside lamp casting long shadows across her back, and I saw it. The smooth, uninterrupted line of her hip, the curve of her backside, completely bare. No lace, no cotton, no familiar elastic band. Just skin. It wasn't a one-off. Not anymore. This was the third time this week. A chill, colder than any winter night, settled in my gut. It was a tiny thing, almost insignificant, but it screamed louder than any accusation. "Everything all right?" I asked, my voice tight. She spun around, a flash of surprise. Or was it guilt? Flickering across her face. "Yeah, just warm. Thought I'd skip the extra layer tonight." "Right," I said, forcing a casual tone. But the unease had taken root. It wasn't just the missing underwear. It was everything else, a collection of tiny, unsettling details that had been piling up like dust motes in a sunbeam. The way she'd started wearing that new crimson dress, the one that clung to her curves like a second skin, a dress that felt foreign, almost like she was trying to impress someone else. The sudden obsession with her hair, always perfectly styled, always smelling of that new, expensive perfume. A scent that lingered in the bedroom long after she'd left. And the phone. God, the phone. It was like a third limb, constantly buzzing, flashing with notifications. She'd snatch it up, her eyes darting to the screen, a flicker of something. Apprehension? Crossing her face before she'd quickly lock it and slip it into her purse. "Work stuff," she'd say, her voice a little too bright, a little too quick. But work didn't text at 1 a.m., did it? I didn't confront her. Not yet. I knew that if I did, she'd just deny it, brush it off, make me feel like I was going crazy. So, I started to watch. I became a ghost in my own home, observing her every move, every glance, every whispered word. I installed a tracking app on her car, a silent, digital eye following her every journey. I kept a notebook, jotting down dates, times, and observations, each entry a tiny pinprick of suspicion. Tonight, we were having dinner at her favorite Italian place. She'd suggested it, a sudden burst of enthusiasm that felt forced. As we sat across from each other, the candlelight casting a warm, deceptive glow, I started to ask casual questions, probing, testing. "How was your day, honey?" I asked, watching her closely. "Oh, busy," she said, her eyes darting away, focusing on the menu. "Anything interesting happen?" I pressed. She shrugged, a nervous twitch in her shoulder. "Not really. Just the usual. You seem a little distracted," I said, my voice low, laced with a hint of accusation. Her eyes snapped up to meet mine, a flash of panic in their depths. "Distracted? No, I'm fine." "Why do you say that?" "Just seems like your mind is somewhere else," I said, my gaze unwavering. She looked down at her plate, her fingers fidgeting with her fork. "I'm just tired, that's all." The silence stretched, thick and heavy, the clinking of silverware and the murmur of other diners fading into a distant hum. I saw her swallow hard, her throat bobbing, and I knew. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that something was very, very wrong. As the night went on, her unease grew. She avoided my eyes, her answers were clipped, and her hands shook slightly as she reached for her wine glass. By the time we left the restaurant, I was a coiled spring, my mind racing, the pieces of the puzzle starting to fall into place. I knew then, with a sinking feeling, that I was going to find out what was truly happening, and I knew it wasn't going to be good. The request hung in the air, a fragile, almost absurd thing, like a soap bubble about to burst. "A weekend getaway," Laura said, her voice laced with a nervous energy that she tried to pass off as casual. "Just me. I need some personal space." My stomach clenched. Personal space. That's what they always said, wasn't it? The prelude to something bigger, something darker. "Personal space," I repeated, my voice flat. "Where exactly?" "Oh, just a little cabin upstate," she said, her eyes darting away. "An old friend from college has one. We're going to catch up." "An old friend," I said, my voice dripping with skepticism. "What's their name?" She hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. Jessica. Jennifer Smith." Jennifer Smith. Right. I'd never heard of her. "And when were you planning on doing this?" "This weekend," she said, her voice a little too quick. I already asked for the time off. The audacity of it. She was practically daring me, testing the limits of my patience. And I, in turn, decided to play along. "All right," I said, my voice calm, almost detached. "Have a good time." Her eyes widened, a flicker of surprise, and maybe relief, crossing her face. She clearly expected a fight, an argument, a tearful confrontation. But I gave her nothing. Just a cold, empty agreement. As soon as she left the room, I moved. I grabbed my laptop, opened a new document, and started a meticulous record of our conversation, every word, every pause, every inflection. I saved the text messages she had sent earlier, the ones that were vague and evasive. I copied the emails, the ones that were equally cryptic. I downloaded the tracking data from her car, the digital breadcrumbs that would lead me to the truth. Then, I made a call. To a lawyer. A sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Carter, who specialized in divorce cases. I explained the situation, the subtle changes, the missing underwear, the sudden need for personal space. She listened, her voice calm and professional, and told me to gather as much evidence as possible. While Laura was packing her bags, I was packing my own. Not clothes, but evidence. I copied the data from her computer, every file, every folder, every hidden document. I installed a small, inconspicuous camera in our bedroom, hidden in the frame of a picture on the dresser. I wanted to see who she called, who she texted, who she might meet when she returned. The night before she left, she came to me, a tentative look on her face. "Are you sure you're okay with this?" she asked, her voice soft. "Perfectly fine," I said, my voice flat. "Have a good time, Laura." She hesitated, then turned and walked away. I watched her go, my heart a cold, hard stone in my chest. The next morning, I watched her drive away, her car disappearing down the street. I waited until she was out of sight. Then I went to work. Not my usual job, but a different kind of work. The kind that involved gathering evidence, preparing legal documents, and bracing myself for the truth. The first night without her was strange. The house felt empty, hollow, the silence amplified by the absence of her presence. I spent the evening reviewing the data I had collected, the text messages, the emails, the tracking data. I found a few oddities, a few inconsistencies, but nothing concrete. Yet, the second night, I reviewed the footage from the hidden camera. Nothing. She hadn't called anyone, hadn't received any visitors. But the silence was telling. It was the absence of evidence that was, in itself, evidence. By the third night, I was a coiled spring, my nerves stretched to the breaking point. I knew something was going to happen. I could feel it. And then, at 11:47 p.m., my phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. "I'm outside," it read. My heart pounded in my chest. I grabbed my phone and went to the window. A dark sedan was parked across the street, its engine idling. I watched as a figure emerged from the shadows, a man, tall and lean, with a familiar silhouette. He walked towards the front door, his footsteps echoing in the quiet night. I knew then. I knew exactly what was happening. And I knew exactly what I was going to do. The click of the key in the lock was sharp, a sound that sliced through the tense silence of the house. Laura stepped inside, a tentative smile on her face, a hint of expectation in her eyes. I stood in the living room, the dim light casting long, unforgiving shadows across my face. She stopped, her smile faltering, her eyes widening as she took in the atmosphere. "Hey," she said, her voice a little too bright, a little too forced. "I'm back." "Welcome home," I said, my voice flat, devoid of any warmth. She hesitated, then took a step closer, her eyes searching mine. "Is everything all right?" "Perfectly fine," I said, my gaze unwavering. "We need to talk." I gestured towards the dining room table, where a thick folder lay open, its contents spilling out like a dark secret. She followed me, her footsteps slow and hesitant. As she sat down, her eyes fell on the folder, and her breath hitched. "What's this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Evidence," I said, my voice cold and clinical. "Evidence of your infidelity." I slid the folder towards her. Inside, there were printouts of text messages, emails, and tracking data. There were stills from the hidden camera footage, showing her phone calls, her late-night texts, the moments when she was alone, but clearly not. And then, there was the list. A meticulously detailed list, written in my own handwriting, chronicling every instance when I had noticed the absence of her underwear. Dates, times, and brief descriptions. It was a small thing, a seemingly insignificant detail, but it was a symbol of her deception, a constant, nagging reminder of her betrayal. Her eyes scanned the documents, her face draining of color. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. I don't understand," she stammered. "Don't play dumb, Laura," I said, my voice laced with a bitter edge. "I know everything." I pushed a stack of papers towards her. "Divorce papers," I said. "I've already spoken to my lawyer. Everything is prepared." She stared at the papers, her eyes filled with a mixture of shock and horror. "Divorce," she whispered. "Just like that." "Just like that," I said, my voice hard. "You made your choices, Laura. Now you have to live with the consequences." But I thought." She stammered, her voice trailing off. "You thought what?" I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "That I wouldn't notice? That I wouldn't care? That I would just forgive and forget?" "No," she said, her voice barely audible. I don't know what I was thinking." "That's the problem, Laura," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You weren't thinking. You were acting on impulse, driven by your own selfish desires." I stood up, my gaze fixed on her. "I've been suspecting you for weeks," I said, my voice cold and precise. "The changes in your routine, the new clothes, the constant checking of your phone. And then, there was the underwear. The absence of it. A small detail, but a glaring one. A symbol of your deception." Her face flushed crimson, a wave of shame washing over her. She looked down at the table, her hands trembling. I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice choked with tears. "Sorry doesn't cut it, Laura," I said, my voice hard. "You broke my trust, you shattered our marriage, and you humiliated me." I turned to leave, but stopped at the door. "I'm not going to make this difficult," I said, my voice flat. "You can take your belongings and leave. I've already changed the locks." I walked out of the room, leaving her sitting at the table, surrounded by the wreckage of her lies. I went to the bedroom, packed a small bag, and left the house. I didn't look back. I drove to a nearby hotel, checked into a room, and collapsed onto the bed. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing, my emotions a tangled mess. I felt anger, betrayal, and a deep, aching sadness. As I lay there, I replayed the events of the past few weeks, the subtle changes, the growing suspicions, the final confrontation. I thought about Laura, her lies, her betrayal, and the life we had built together, now shattered beyond repair. I knew then that I had made the right decision. I had to end it. I couldn't live with the constant suspicion, the constant wondering, the constant fear of being betrayed again. But as I closed my eyes, a single thought lingered in my mind. What if I was wrong? What if I had misinterpreted the signs? What if I had destroyed my marriage for nothing? The silence in the office was thick, heavy with unspoken judgments. Laura's footsteps echoed as she walked to her desk, the whispers following her like a dark cloud. Every glance, every hushed conversation, was a sharp, stinging reminder of her public humiliation. It wasn't just the divorce. It was the way it had happened, the details that had somehow, subtly leaked. The missing underwear, the late-night rendezvous, the meticulously documented evidence. It was all out there, circulating like a virus, poisoning her reputation. She knew it was Thomas. He hadn't screamed or shouted, but he'd been precise, surgical. A quiet rage, a calculated dismantling of her life, piece by piece. She could almost picture him, a ghost in her past, pulling the strings, watching her world crumble. The phone rang, a shrill interruption to her thoughts. It was HR. They were polite, professional, but the message was clear. Her position was no longer tenable. The whispers had reached the higher-ups, and the company, always image-conscious, couldn't afford the scandal. She packed her belongings, the contents of her desk feeling strangely light, insignificant. As she walked out of the building, she saw the pitying glances, the averted eyes. It was a walk of shame, a public execution of her reputation. Finding a new job was a nightmare. The internet was a minefield, her name popping up with every search, the details of her divorce splashed across gossip sites and online forums. Every interview was a veiled interrogation, a polite but pointed inquiry into her personal life. Meanwhile, I was building a new life. It wasn't easy. The nights were long, filled with the ghosts of what was, but I was determined to move forward. I threw myself into my work, finding a strange solace in the structured chaos of my job. I started attending therapy, a space where I could unpack the tangled mess of my emotions, the betrayal, the anger, the lingering sense of loss. And then, I met Amelia. She was different. Honest, direct, with a quiet strength that drew me in. We started slowly, coffee dates, long walks in the park, conversations that stretched late into the night. She listened without judgment, her eyes filled with understanding. She didn't try to fix me, but she offered a steady hand, a quiet presence that allowed me to heal. One evening, as we sat in a small cafe, Amelia reached across the table and took my hand. "You're a good man, Thomas," she said, her voice soft. "You deserve happiness." Her words were like a balm, a gentle reminder that I wasn't defined by my past. I kissed her then, a soft, tentative kiss that spoke of hope and new beginnings. Laura, meanwhile, was spiraling. She tried to contact me, phone calls, text messages, even showing up at my apartment. "We need to talk," she'd say, her voice desperate. "We can work this out." But I was done. I had nothing left to say. "It's over, Laura," I'd say, my voice flat. "I've moved on." One evening, I took Amelia to a charity gala, a public event, a statement. We walked in hand, our smiles genuine, our connection undeniable. I saw Laura across the room, her eyes fixed on us, a mixture of pain and regret etched on her face. She tried to approach us, but I turned away, my arm tightening around Amelia's waist. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of a confrontation. I wouldn't give her the power to disrupt my new happiness. As the night wore on, I saw her slip away, her figure disappearing into the crowd. I felt a pang of something, not guilt, but a fleeting sense of sadness. But it was quickly overshadowed by the warmth of Amelia's hand in mine, the quiet joy of a new beginning. Weeks turned into months. My life with Amelia was a breath of fresh air. We built a life together, filled with laughter, shared dreams, and a deep, unwavering trust. I learned to let go of the anger, the bitterness, the lingering shadows of the past. One day, I received a letter. It was from Laura. It wasn't an apology, not really. It was more of a reflection, a recognition of her mistakes, a quiet acknowledgement of the pain she had caused. She didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't try to justify her actions. She simply said she understood. I read the letter, a strange sense of closure washing over me. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, a reminder of a chapter closed, a lesson learned. Life went on. I was happy. Truly happy. But sometimes, late at night, when the world was quiet, I would think about Laura, about what could have been. And I would wonder, just for a moment, if I had made the right choice. Or if I had destroyed something that could have been saved. And then I would think of Amelia, her smile, her touch, and I would know that I had found my peace. But a small nagging feeling deep down told me that this story was far from over. The years blurred, a montage of solitary mornings and quiet evenings. Laura's apartment, once a temporary refuge, had become her permanent address. The city lights, once a vibrant backdrop to her life, now seemed to mock her solitude. She'd built a wall around herself, a fortress of regret and what-ifs. She'd watched from the periphery as Thomas's life blossomed. Social media became a cruel window into his happiness. Smiling photos with Amelia, vacations, milestones, a life filled with warmth and connection. They had built a family, a strong, loving unit that radiated joy. One evening, she found herself at a charity gala, a last-minute invitation from a distant acquaintance. The room buzzed with energy, the clinking of glasses and the murmur of conversations filling the air. And then, she saw them. Thomas and Amelia stood across the room, their children laughing beside them. They were a picture of contentment, a portrait of a life well lived. Thomas's eyes, once filled with suspicion and hurt, now held a quiet strength, a gentle warmth. Amelia's smile was genuine, her hand resting lightly on Thomas's arm. They were a team, a partnership forged in trust and love. Laura watched them, her heart aching with a familiar pang of regret. She saw the life she had lost, the future she had squandered. It wasn't just Thomas, it was the entire tapestry of her life, the connections she had severed, the trust she had broken. She understood then, with a clarity that stung, the magnitude of her betrayal. She slipped away, unnoticed, the noise of the gala fading into a distant hum. Back in her apartment, the silence was deafening. She sat at her kitchen table, a blank sheet of paper in front of her. Words began to flow, a torrent of unspoken thoughts and unexpressed emotions. She wrote to Thomas, not seeking forgiveness, but expressing her understanding. She wrote about the mistakes she had made, the pain she had caused, the realization that she had destroyed her own happiness. She wrote about the years of regret, the quiet solitude, the understanding that she had no one to blame but herself. She wrote about seeing him with his family, and how she understood, finally, how much she had lost. She wrote about watching him rebuild his life, and how she admired his strength. She wrote about how she was not looking for forgiveness, but just wanted him to know that she understood. She finished the letter, folded it, and placed it in an envelope. She addressed it to Thomas, then hesitated. She looked at the letter, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and acceptance. She knew that sending it wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't erase the past, it wouldn't undo her mistakes. She tore the letter into small pieces, the fragments falling into the trash like fallen leaves. She watched them settle, a silent testament to her unspoken regrets. Years passed. Laura continued her solitary life, a quiet observer of the world around her. She found a measure of peace in her solitude, a sense of acceptance in her past. She learned to live with her choices, to carry the weight of her regrets without letting them define her. One evening, she was walking through a park, a place she often went to find solace. She saw a familiar figure sitting on a bench, his back to her. It was Thomas. He was alone, his gaze fixed on the setting sun. She hesitated, then turned to leave. But something stopped her. She took a deep breath and walked towards him. She sat down on the bench beside him, the silence stretching between them. She didn't speak, didn't try to break the quiet. After a long moment, Thomas turned to her, his eyes filled with a quiet understanding. He didn't say anything, but his gaze spoke volumes. They sat in silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon, the sky painted in hues of orange and purple. The silence wasn't awkward, but peaceful. It was a shared moment of understanding, a quiet acknowledgement of the past, and a silent acceptance of the present. As the last rays of sunlight faded, Laura stood up. She looked at Thomas, a faint smile on her lips. She turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing in the quiet evening. She knew then that she had found her peace. Not in forgiveness, not in reconciliation, but in acceptance. She had learned to live with her choices, to carry her regrets with grace, and to find solace in the quiet solitude of her own life. And as she walked away, she knew that she would never forget the life she had lost, but she also knew that she had found a new way to live.